Have you ever promised yourself that this time things would be different? Maybe you decided you would stop procrastinating, stop reacting with anger, stop choosing the same type of relationship, or stop falling back into habits you know are not good for you. For a few days, everything seems to change. You feel motivated, you feel aware. But then slowly and almost without noticing, you return to the same patterns again, the same reactions, the same choices, the same results. Many people interpret this as a lack of discipline or willpower. They assume that if they were stronger, more motivated, or more determined, they would be able to change their behavior permanently. But modern neuroscience suggests that the real reason is much deeper. The truth is that most of our behaviors are not conscious decisions. Elas são padrões automáticos criados pelo cerebro ao longo do tempo. To understand why we repeat the same mistakes, we need to understand how habits are formed inside the brain. One of the most influential ideas in behavioral neuroscience is the concept of the habit loop. This concept describes how repeated behaviors gradually become automatic through a simple three-step cycle. First, there is a cue. A cue is a trigger that tells the brain to initiate a behavior. It could be a place, a time of day, a specific emotion, or even a certain person. Second, there is the routine. This is the behavior itself, the action that follows the trigger. Third, there is the reward. The brain receives some form of benefit such as pleasure, relief, distraction, or emotional comfort. When this loop repeats many times, the brain begins to automate the process. Instead of consciously deciding what to do, the brain simply runs the program. Over time, these programs become deeply embedded in neural circuits. This process is closely connected to a region of the brain called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia play a major role in habit formation and automatic behavior. Their function is to help the brain conserve energy by turning repeated actions into routines. From an evolutionary perspective, this system is extremely efficient. If the brain had to consciously think about every action we perform during the day, we would become mentally exhausted very quickly. By automating behaviors, the brain frees up energy for other tasks, but there is a downside. Once a habit is stored in these neural circuits, the brain tends to repeat it even when it is no longer beneficial. This is why people often feel trapped in patterns they logically know are harmful. Someone might repeatedly return to unhealthy relationships. Someone might keep procrastinating even when it damages their goals. Someone might react with anxiety or anger in situations where those reactions are not helpful. The brain is not necessarily choosing what is best. It is choosing what is familiar. And familiarity creates a powerful sense of safety inside the nervous system. Another important factor is emotional conditioning. Experiences that carry strong emotions tend to leave deeper marks in the brain. When a situation produces intense stress, fear, excitement, or pleasure, the brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with that experience. Over time, thoughts and emotions begin to reinforce each other. A thought produces a familiar emotion. That emotion reinforces the same thought pattern. The brain strengthens the circuit again. Eventually, this cycle can become so automatic that it starts to feel like part of our personality. People often say things like, "That's just the way I am. I've always reacted like this. I can't change that part of myself." But neuroscience suggests that what we call personality is often the result of long-term patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. In other words, personality can become a collection of repeated habits. Some researchers describe this as the brain operating on autopilot. Studies in cognitive science suggest that a large portion of our daily actions are driven by unconscious processes rather than deliberate choices. The brain constantly predicts what will happen next based on past experiences. When a familiar situation appears, the brain activates the corresponding pattern automatically. This is why change can feel so. When you try to behave differently, you are not just making a new decision. You are attempting to interrupt a neural circuit that may have been reinforced thousands of times. From the brain's perspective, the old pattern is efficient and reliable. The new behavior, on the other hand, requires more energy and attention. This is one of the reasons why many people can maintain a new habit for a few days or weeks but eventually return to their previous behavior. The brain is constantly trying to return to the most familiar neural pathways. However, there is an important piece of good news. The same brain that builds habits is also capable of changing them. This ability is known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's capacity to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. When we repeatedly practice a new behavior or thought pattern, the brain gradually strengthens those circuits. At the same time, circuits that are no longer used begin to weaken. This means that breaking a habit is not about fighting the brain. It is about retraining it. One of the first and most important steps in this process is awareness. Many habits operate below the level of conscious attention. People react automatically without realizing that a pattern has been triggered. But the moment you notice a pattern as it begins, something important happens. You create a gap between the stimulus and the response. In that small gap, the brain has an opportunity to choose a different action. At first, this process requires effort. The brain prefers to run the familiar program, and interrupting that program can feel uncomfortable. But every time a person interrupts the old routine and chooses a new behavior, the brain receives a new signal. Over time, these signals accumulate. The neural pathway associated with the old habit begins to weaken, while the pathway associated with the new behavior becomes stronger. Gradually, the new response becomes easier and more natural. This is how long-term change occurs. It is rarely the result of a single moment of motivation. Instead, it emerges from consistent repetition of small shifts in behavior and attention. The brain is constantly adapting to what we repeatedly do and think. If we repeatedly reinforce the same reactions, the brain strengthens those circuits. But if we repeatedly interrupt the pattern and practice something new, the brain begins to reorganize itself. Understanding this process can completely change the way we think about personal change. Instead of seeing repeated mistakes as proof of weakness, we can see them as evidence of powerful neural programming. And programming can be rewritten. The brain is not fixed. Even though habits may feel deeply ingrained, they are not permanent structures. They are dynamic networks that can evolve throughout life. The key is not simply trying harder. The key is becoming aware of the patterns that run automatically and consciously choosing new ones often enough for the brain to learn a different way of responding. Every time a person becomes aware of an old pattern and interrupts it, something subtle but important happens inside the brain. A new possibility begins to form. And over time, those possibilities can become the foundation of a completely different way of thinking, feeling, and living.